Don't come back here because my girlfriend and I are going to live in this house." On the day my 3-year-old daughter was finally allowed to come home from the hospital after being there for a month, I returned to find my husband living with another woman. I was shocked by his betrayal. Both he and his girlfriend laughed at me, mocking me. To make things worse, my husband had the nerve to call me back to clean up the house, essentially kicking me out. Furious, I talked to some people and made sure my husband and his girlfriend faced consequences for their actions. My name is Emily. I met my husband Michael through my sister's husband, and we lived together with our 3-year-old daughter. We built our house while I was pregnant. We chose everything together, keeping it white inside and out, which I really liked. However, white gets dirty easily, so it needs a lot of cleaning. My husband gets very upset if there is even a small stain. He gets angry when our daughter spills food or dirties the walls. But he never helps clean up. He just complains that the house is dirty. He always points out the tiniest details, and lately I've been getting really fed up with it. Initially, I quit my job and became a full-time housewife after we got married. But when our daughter started kindergarten, I decided to work part-time to save money for the future. Since I started working, I hoped my husband would help more with housework and childcare. However, he thinks that my part-time job is my own choice. So he continues to leave all the household and childcare duties to me, just like before. One day, after sending our daughter to kindergarten, my sister and her husband, who live nearby, were supposed to visit our house. I tried to tidy up as much as possible while helping my daughter get ready in the morning. My husband got annoyed that our daughter was touching things with her messy hands and called me before he left for work, complaining that I wasn't disciplining her properly. Even though he used to adore her when she was born, lately he looks at her as if she is something dirty. I try not to show my feelings in front of our daughter, but his attitude has been really upsetting me. Because my husband complained, I was running late to take my daughter to kindergarten and rushed to get back home to meet my sister and her husband. They had decided to visit just 2 days earlier when they called to see if I had time to meet. I thought they must have something important to talk about, but when I saw them at the front door, I realized it might not be good news. I invited my sister and her husband into the living room, and although they complimented our always clean house, their expressions remained serious. After I served them coffee, my sister's husband finally gathered the courage to speak. "Actually, I've heard some not-so-good rumors about Michael." What he said next was unbelievable. Apparently, my husband was having an affair with a coworker. My husband was originally introduced to me by my sister's husband, but they weren't directly acquainted. It was through a mutual friend of theirs, my husband's brother. In other words, my brother-in-law's friend works at the same company as my husband, and he had heard some bad rumors from a colleague. One of the colleagues said that a female coworker had been going around saying she has a boyfriend in the company, and it seemed like she was talking about my husband. Just as my brother-in-law's friend was trying to discreetly find out if the rumors were true, he accidentally stumbled upon my husband and the woman together. They weren't even trying to hide it, openly flirting at the company. His friend was shocked, took a photo of them, and reported it to my brother-in-law. Then my brother-in-law told my sister's husband and showed him the photo. Even though my sister's husband initially couldn't believe it, he had to accept the truth when he saw the photo evidence. He had the photos with him, but I chose not to look at them. My sister and her husband apologized, feeling sorry for introducing me to a man who would cheat. Finding out about my husband's affair left me unsure of what to do. I had never doubted him before my sister's husband shared his story. Most of all, I didn't want to take my daughter's father away from her. But I also couldn't bear the idea of being betrayed. Just as I was about to discuss next steps with my sister and her husband, my phone rang. It was the kindergarten, informing me that my daughter had a high fever and needed to be picked up. It looks like my daughter is sick with a fever, so I needed to go pick her up. When I mentioned this, my sister and her husband, who had come by car, offered to come with me to get my daughter. The 3 of us went together to pick her up from kindergarten. When we got to the kindergarten, my daughter looked exhausted, and it was clear her illness was more serious than a common cold. Her cheeks appeared swollen, and her teacher mentioned that a classmate had MPS, raising concerns that my daughter might have it too. We hurried to the hospital and informed the reception about our suspicions regarding MPS, given her symptoms. They decided she needed immediate tests because there was a risk of complications. While waiting for the test results, I became anxious and tried calling my husband, but he didn't answer and didn't call me back. Soon after, we learned from the test results that my daughter had MPS and had developed meningitis. She was admitted to the hospital immediately and settled into a room. After getting an explanation about her hospitalization and seeing that she was asleep, I decided to go home to prepare for her stay. My sister and her husband offered to stay with her, so I called a taxi and headed home. Late at night, my husband finally returned my call. He sounded annoyed that I had called him while he was at work and said sharply, "Don't call me during work." I explained our daughter's condition, her fever, hospitalization, and meningitis diagnosis, but he didn't seem to grasp how serious it was. He responded dismissively, "You're with her at the hospital, so don't bother me with every little thing. I'll stay there for a while to be with her." "All right, I'll leave it to you," he said, and then abruptly hung up without expressing any concern for our daughter. As a result, my daughter stayed in the hospital for over a month. During that time, my sister, her husband, my parents, and even my in-laws visited us frequently, worried about her. Surprisingly, my husband never visited once. When it was time for my daughter to be discharged, I asked my husband to pick us up, but he refused, claiming he was too busy with work. I shared this with my sister, and she and her husband offered to drive us home instead. On the day of my daughter's discharge, my sister's husband drove us home. It was a relief to see my daughter back to her normal self after such a long ordeal. However, when we arrived home, I noticed my husband's car in the parking lot, even though he was supposed to be at work. Through the window, I could see the silhouette of a woman inside. My sister and her husband also saw it and were furious, convinced it was his affair partner. I stopped them from barging in, left my sleeping daughter with them in the car, and went inside alone. When I entered the living room, I saw a woman standing close to my husband, just as I had seen from outside the window. When my husband noticed me, he quickly moved away from her. But it was already too late. I had seen everything. "Hey, I'm back. Who's this?" I asked him. Instead of answering, my husband stepped in front of the woman as if to shield her from me. Ignoring my question, he demanded, "Why are you here?" I couldn't believe it. He had forgotten the day our daughter was supposed to come home from the hospital. "I told you today was the day she's getting out of the hospital," I insisted. "No way. You said it was tomorrow. You tricked me into coming back today." My husband's response made it clear he had been so focused on bringing his mistress home that he forgot about our daughter. The woman peeked around my husband, looked at me, and smirked. Then she remarked to him, "Is this your wife?" What a chubby old lady. Hearing that, my husband's attitude hardened as he declared, "Yeah, I've got a young and cute girlfriend now. We decided to live here together, so don't come back." He put his arm around his mistress, as if to emphasize their relationship. I recalled the moment my sister's husband had revealed the affair to me. Despite my initial hesitation about divorce, witnessing my husband's behavior during our daughter's hospitalization shattered any remaining love I had for him. He hadn't visited our daughter even once in the hospital, leaving me to handle everything alone while he took advantage of my absence to spend time with his mistress in our home. I had taken time off from my part-time job and was exhausted from running between the hospital and home. Instead of supporting me during this difficult time, he was flaunting his new relationship and demanding I stay away from our own house. I was forced to clean up after my husband and his mistress, who had the audacity to tell me not to come back home. Exhausted and unable to argue any longer, I quickly packed my things and returned to the car where my sister and her husband were waiting. As I left, my husband and his mistress laughed at me. In the car, I shared what had happened with my sister and her husband. They were ready to confront my husband, but I stopped them. I didn't want my daughter to witness a scene like that, so I asked them to take us to my parents' house instead. We found a warm welcome there, and my daughter gradually improved while staying with my parents. From the time our daughter started crawling, my husband seemed only concerned about cleanliness and rarely interacted with her. His affection for her was fleeting, and she likely doesn't have many memories of him being loving or attentive. She never expressed a desire to see her father or mentioned feeling lonely. I didn't have the energy to confront my husband when I left our house, but I couldn't let things continue like this. Now that my daughter was recovering and could possibly return to kindergarten, I started to consider what to do about my husband. One day, I got a call from him. Curious about what he wanted to say, I answered. He bluntly told me, "The house is dirty. Come back and clean it." Even though he should have been living there with his affair partner, It seemed like neither of them did any housework. My sister had mentioned she was young and likely hadn't lived on her own before, leaving household chores to her family. It was absurd for my husband, who had told me not to return, to now demand that I come back just to clean. His request struck me as incredibly selfish. I declined his request in disbelief. "You should clean your own house, or maybe that girl you're having an affair with can do it," I retorted, hanging up the phone. Despite my husband's persistent calls afterward, I ignored them all. I could only imagine his frustration on the other end, unsure of what would happen next. Later that night, after putting my daughter to bed with the help of my parents, I was folding laundry in the living room when I heard a commotion at the front door. Curious, I went to investigate. As I opened the door, I was shocked to see my husband and his affair partner standing there, completely soaked in red. Behind them, my sister and her husband, along with my in-laws, stood with stern expressions, ensuring they couldn't escape. My husband and his affair partner apologized, saying, "We are truly sorry." However, my sister, her husband, and my in-laws didn't accept their apology. What covered them from head to toe was not blood but tomato juice. After my husband had called me to clean the house, I immediately informed my sister, her husband, and my in-laws about it. My sister and her husband visited my husband first, while my in-laws, who lived nearby, drove over to his place. My sister and her husband tricked my husband into going to the garden, pretending they needed some gardening tools I owned. When he turned his back, they pelted him with tomatoes. Startled, he turned around, only to have more tomatoes thrown at his face. These tomatoes were overripe and very soft, sourced as waste from a farm owned by a relative of my sister's husband. They wouldn't have caused much physical pain upon impact, but their squishy inside splattered easily, which clearly affected my husband, who prized cleanliness. My sister and her husband didn't give him a chance to react and continued throwing tomatoes. The tomatoes not only hit my husband but also splattered against the pristine white walls of the house, causing chaos. As this unfolded, my in-laws arrived on the scene. My husband was now being bombarded with tomatoes by my sister, her husband, and my in-laws. Amidst his panic screams and flailing, his affair partner, curious about the commotion, appeared in the garden. Without hesitation, she too became a target for the tomatoes. Attempting to flee back inside, she was forcefully pulled back out by my sister and ended up running alongside my husband in the garden. I overheard everything while on the phone from the moment my sister and her husband showed up at my husband's place. Every time the walls outside got dirty, my husband would scream sadly, and his affair partner would join in crying and panicking. Eventually, my sister, her husband, and my in-laws threw all the tomatoes they had brought. By then, the two of them had calmed down completely. They were then walked to my parents' house nearby. Even though I can never forgive what my husband and his lover did, hearing my husband's pitiful voice and the lover's cries made me feel a bit better. It was almost funny to see them both so desperate, apologizing to me. My sister's husband came up with this plan. After my daughter left the hospital, I began to doubt my husband's behavior during her stay. I decided to set up the baby monitor we used when she was little in our bedroom. I suspected that if my sister's husband was right, my husband might have been bringing his lover to our house while our daughter and I were away. I was anxious that the hidden baby monitor, concealed near a houseplant, would be discovered at any moment. Fortunately, neither my husband nor his lover found it, and it captured everything they did. Since the day my daughter was in the hospital, it seemed like my husband was living with his lover at our house part-time. Each time I returned home, I saved the recorded footage as proof. After my daughter left the hospital and I confirmed my husband's affair, I confided in my sister and her husband about the video evidence and sought their advice on what to do next. They suggested involving my in-laws first. My in-laws live about a 30-minute drive away and are usually calm people, unlike my husband who often gets angry. So with my sister and her husband, I took the evidence to my in-laws' house. At first, they found it hard to believe that their son could cheat. However, when we showed them the footage, they saw undeniable proof of my husband being intimate with his lover. They had no choice but to believe me. What's worse, my husband was heard saying hurtful things about our daughter, like how she just makes a mess and isn't cute at all, and that he wanted to throw both her and me out. This revelation made my in-laws furious. They wanted to confront my husband immediately. but my sister, her husband, and I convinced them to hold off for the moment. When my husband found out I knew about the affair, he became defiant. We didn't want to give in to his wishes for a quick divorce, so we discussed with my in-laws how to come up with a fitting punishment. Seeing the evidence on the video, my in-laws were also deeply hurt and immediately agreed to our plan. After brainstorming together, we decided on a unique punishment: throwing tomatoes at him. This idea came from my sister's husband, who had studied in Spain and was inspired by the tomato festival there. We thought it would be satisfying because my husband really dislikes getting dirty, and throwing tomatoes wouldn't cause any harm. It was also convenient timing since my sister's husband's relatives, who are farmers, had an excess of tomatoes that were going to be discarded. Initially, I was taken aback by the unusual idea, but I soon realized that simply throwing tomatoes wouldn't suffice. I felt my husband deserved to experience some discomfort from being hit by tomatoes, so I agreed to the plan. My sister, her husband, and my in-laws were all set to carry it out. I wanted to join in throwing tomatoes at my husband as well, but I was still concerned about my daughter's well-being and couldn't leave my parents' house. Additionally, my sister and her husband felt guilty for introducing me to my husband, and my in-laws felt responsible for how they raised their son. So it was decided that the four of them would proceed with the plan without me. I made sure they promised to do it outside the house, not inside. Despite my disappointment at not being able to throw tomatoes myself, witnessing my husband and his lover in such a pitiful state, thanks to my family, was oddly satisfying. I had already informed my parents about my husband's affair, so when they were brought to my parents' house, they were visibly uneasy. I threw the divorce papers at my husband without looking him in the eye and said firmly, "Let's get divorced. I have all the evidence of your affair. You'll also need to pay child support." Upon hearing the mention of child support, the lover reacted with disbelief. It seemed she had been imagining marrying my husband, becoming a housewife, and living comfortably. Realizing that child support payments could burden her financially, she began denying any involvement, claiming, "I have nothing to do with this man." That's when I mentioned the footage from the baby monitor. At this point, the lover argued that it was an invasion of privacy, and my husband backed her up, threatening legal action against me. However, my in-laws, along with my sister and her husband, scolded them harshly. Still shaken from the tomato incident, both of them fell silent quickly. When I reiterated to my husband that he needed to agree to the divorce, he reluctantly began to complain. "I've been supporting you all this time, and as a housewife, you should obey your husband. You can't even clean properly. You were a useless wife. It's only natural that I cheated on you," my husband sarcastically remarked, mocking the idea of a part-time working mother being able to support herself. However, there was a reason why I decided to return to my parents' house this time. It wasn't just because my parents and my sister and her husband welcomed me back, but also because I was offered a full-time position at my part-time job. When I informed my husband about this opportunity, he clicked his tongue in frustration. That's when I made it clear to him that my daughter and I would never return to that house again. Predictably, my husband started complaining about who would clean the walls of the house. But ultimately, it was his infidelity that caused all of this, and he was entirely at fault. When he demanded that I pay for cleaning the exterior, my in-laws had had enough. They disowned him right then and there for bringing up such trivial matters at this point. After being disowned by my in-laws, my husband unexpectedly proposed to his mistress. Covered in tomato and feeling humiliated, she had lost all affection for him, and the idea of paying child support added to her rejection. She bluntly told my husband, "I'm not interested in a man without money," leaving him stunned. Under our stern gazes, my husband reluctantly agreed to our divorce. We informed them that we would continue discussions through our lawyers, and then we sent my husband and his mistress away. I'm not sure what they discussed on their way back, but apparently, they ended up angrily arguing and parted ways, cursing each other out. Afterwards, my husband ended up living alone in our house, struggling to manage the mortgage and child support payments on his own. He tried seeking help from his brother, but was coldly turned away and cut off from his family. Now he had no one left to rely on. Meanwhile, the mistress faced repercussions from the rumors about her relationship with my husband. She ended up quitting her job, and when her affair was discovered by her parents, they disowned her just like my husband's family did to him. She was kicked out of her parents' home and now lives in a cheap, run-down apartment, During the day, she works part-time, and at night, she works in a nightclub to make ends meet. My sister once spotted the mistress working at a store's register and remarked how much weight she had lost and how aged she looked, despite being in her early 20s. It's heartbreaking to think about how a single mistake could dramatically alter someone's life and rob them of so many potential happy moments. As for me, I've started working full-time with the support of my parents, sister, and her husband, who welcome me back to their home. It's challenging at times, but I'm beginning to feel a sense of achievement as I take on more responsibilities at work. My daughter has settled into living with my parents and is thriving each day. When we lived with my husband, she struggled to get along with adult men, likely due to his yelling. Now, she's gradually overcoming that thanks to the kindness shown by my sister's husband and my father. Surrounded by a caring family, my daughter and I are now enjoying a peaceful and happy life.